Hi. Hi, everybody. Hello. I'm sorry for the delay. Yeah. Couple things just going off. How am I feeling? So the alter ego basically never gets sick, but enough sleep deprivation in a row will eventually be the same. It's the same symptoms as being very sick. So, but it usually gets better. So I figured I'd just push it back and see. It's one thing to just feel ill and do your normal whatever, push through. But standing up here was a little different. So I just wanted to make sure before we got things going that I would actually be okay. I've still not solved our kind of audio problems in general. That's actually what started this whole problem, since the audio failed the night before with the very first stream and stayed up coming up with an ad hoc solution, and then stayed up the next night to try to put it back to the real solution. And so I've just never had a chance to actually get back into the ever catch up, basically. Well, I was turning things on, and so I could see people talking about it. But don't worry, this is not like the pace I intend forever. I'm very impressed and almost apologetic to the people who've been watching this all along and watching all the streams as well. I realize that's a tremendous amount of time. Won't be like this again. I had this week, try to get all the way through Evangelion. In a way, dealing with the problem of perfect is the enemy of the good. I'm gonna do the whole thing on whiteboards. Perfect is the enemy of the good is a problem I struggle with, and so by having a limited time in which I could do this, the only possible time I could do this, constrains it somewhat, right? And so, yeah, it's definitely, I know it's a lot. But this is not, in the future, nothing like this. This just let us get through a tremendous amount of material, a tremendous amount of confusing material without me feeling I had to go through every little thing, which I think at some point you get diminishing returns on anyway, right? So, that is a deal. I usually get better as we go on. As soon as I start talking about this, I'll forget how I feel anyway, so it won't matter. This thing closer today. I don't know what's going on. So this is what we're going to do. Put y'all in chat. We're going to go ahead and just talk about both episodes. If you see you're not going to do the right thing, huh? We are going to, there we go. We are going to talk about, the spoilers are restricted. We're not going to try and not talk about 26 the same time we talk about 25, right? Because they are kind of part of the same thing. And so, I can't get this to cooperate. I'm sorry. It's always something. Yes, it is basically kind of like one episode. It's sort of a single event that is happening that is simply broken into two. And so we're not going to worry about splitting it up like that. So we will go straight through. We won't take a break between them. And then later today, the recap movie. I fell asleep trying to watch it last night. But I tried to skip through it. If there is much new material, I don't think it's much. I think it's more really that if you've been watching the Netflix ones that are that if you've been watching the Netflix version of these episodes, I think a lot of the stuff that was originally in some of the death recap is stuff you've seen already. So So what this session this afternoon will be, evening will be, depending where you are, we'll just mostly be looking back and trying to clarify anything that people don't understand about 1 through 26. So if you need to make up for all the time that we've lost in this, you can probably bag it, right? It's going to be very short, for my sake as well. But I did schedule it. I did want to make sure that before we get into End of Evangelion, that people aren't missing something that they. Yeah, so that's it. That's the point of it. I mean, it might be helpful to watch anyway. The recap movie's an hour long, maybe not even an hour, and so I think there's a tiny bit of maybe things in there, and that's what I'm going to look for in the gap to talk about. But the one thing it does do that might be helpful, depending, is it does present the story in a different order. It skips around a little bit, but if you feel pretty sure about what you understand about the series to this point, diminishing returns here, right? And so for me also, I would much rather spend more of that time getting ready for End of Evangelion. So to the couple people who have subscribed that I've missed, thank you. Welcome. I appreciate it. But that is going to be the deal. So that out of the way, I know we have some people who are going through for the very first time. This is the first time I've ever seen Evangelion, and I remember what it was like to watch episodes 25 and 26. And I think perhaps you can understand how the community was left wondering many things, right? You at least have the benefit of knowing there is more to the story, right? Originally, there was no such... Yes, that is exactly it. What did I just watch? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a... By the time it even came over to like the Western world in mass and people were really becoming aware of it, the knowledge of more to come was already there. So even we can't quite put ourselves in the place of the people who were watching this obviously a revolutionary thing unfold before them and getting invested in these characters and the complexity and all these mysteries, and then it ends with this kind of existential inner world, 2-episode inner monologue almost. It took longer for it to come to us, but by the time people were starting to become aware of it on a large scale, the knowledge that more would come, it was already the knowledge that more would come, which made it, I guess, a little better. Worst gap, but yeah. Yeah, it is. It changes the way you experience 25 and 26, not knowing that that's not just it, right? And so there is a lot of... It's interesting because if you take it in isolation, it's clear that it answers some things. It answers some of the thematic character arcs, but leaves a lot of them... At least some of the character arcs especially kind of unfinished. But mostly there are mysteries that obviously meant to answer, right? They could set up some of them up right before we go into it, and then they're never brought up, right? So... Yes, it is much easier to look at this or understand this as more of a thing that exists in the middle of a story rather than the actual conclusion, right? Yes, I mean, we had a conversation days ago about director's cut and artists getting in and talking about their work, and this is such a strange example for that. I mean, there's quite a strong argument here for releasing the rest of the story. Yeah, I mean, I can see this. I mean, I had the same thing. I had a delay between 25 and 26. It struck me for a completely different reason. Mostly because I just wanted to figure out why, well, what I just saw for sure, but how that made, well, how that made sense at conclusion, I guess. How that made sense is to end with everyone standing around congratulating Shinji. I mean, if you've never seen this before, you've probably all through anime communities seen the congratulations things show up without understanding the context, but that was like how it ended. That was like the end for a while. And so so yeah. Yes, or the actual Japanese, depending. Yeah, and it's like what wasn't helpful, at least if you are someone who's more familiar with Western storytelling tropes, is that Eastern storytelling in general, very broad strokes here, is not as obsessed with a definite resolution, with as obsessed with tying up every loose end. It is one of the things that made anime appealing to me, but this is like one step further than that, right? If you have no experience with that, so. But yeah. All right. So let us actually talk about things. I do have notes and all this, and I'm going to try to go through this, even though we're talking about 25 and 26 in general, and I will probably occasionally refer ahead a little bit. I'm going to try to go through this mostly in the order it happens, because you can almost see this as a whole argument building in Shinji's mind. So we're going to try to follow through. What I say is, again, just my interpretation of how this should be happening. And so it's totally valid if you interpret some of this differently. It's in a series full of things that are unclear. This is especially unclear. But the way I have come to understand it is what I will explain. So, wrong or right, we will find out. Let me just push this up tight, just a touch. I think I'm going to end up having to, I don't know, buy a whole separate sound card or something for the stream PC. I can't figure out the problem. All right. Yeah, it is at least consistent with not answering. And I think even from, I don't remember now how this is different from, this Netflix version is different from the original. I cannot remember. I don't have access to how I watched it originally anyway, but we're going to roll. Again, Netflix one is our text. That's what we're going to work with. So, so what these episodes have, one of the big reasons they're disorienting is that there's a new storytelling tool, right? And it disorients us. And that tool is the constant narration that is mostly in the form of text, often repetitive text. And sometimes that same kind of narration is voiced by a character who is in the scene. Or at least like the form of them is in the scene. It's a massive departure from the way the series has been told to this point. Because other than title screens telling us like it's this year or we're in this place, there's essentially been no third person or unvoiced narration, right? Like everything we learn about the series is someone saying it, someone thinking it, overhearing information. There's never this moment, or it's almost except for like the dates, there's never this moment of just speaking straight to the audience, as it seems. And so it's more than just that. It's more than just, here's case one, here's what's happening in the background, this instrumentality is taking place, all those things that are obviously to help the audience stay oriented. It's not just that. It's not a communication only to us. It's often a communication to the characters. It's as if they are hearing what those title screens say, right? As if it was actually actual dialogue that they can hear, but we cannot. So in one way, it's kind of an inversion of the techniques that they've used to this point to increase audience empathy, where, which we've kind of pointed out as we've gone along, because we seem a lot more like outsiders to a lot of these scenes, right? Much more like spectators. We're unable to hear inflection or any kind of variance in that text narration. So it's a distance between how we are experiencing the questions or the accusations, whatever they are, and the way the characters are experiencing that. So now, for the first time, there is this intentional barrier between how we are experiencing those repetitive things and how the characters are. But, kind of like I said at the beginning, the contrast between that title narration is very disorienting compared to everything else. And so we are completely out of sorts and kind of bewildered. And this we do have in common with the characters, who are trying to sort out what happens at the same time we are. So there's just new tension in the technique where we are pushed further from the ability to understand what the characters are going from, but that confusion helps us relate to their confusion, if that makes sense. So we're kind of go through the first couple. Let me just pop this over. Let's make this easier. We're going to pop this over and kind of talk in detail about the pattern that the episodes use for a large part in the way they tell, because it's so different. We won't spend this amount of time on the whole thing. So it starts off with it lays out subject matter, the raison d'être, the reason for one's being, the reason it's okay to be here, and rephrases it into that. So there will be several instances of the title cards telling us who is in focus at any given moment. And I've already shown, like the case of Shinji Ikari. Okay. And so it begins by rehashing the most recent event in Shinji's life, the killing of Kaoru, right? And the narration will simplify the exchange, right? Boy wished for his death. Another boy granted that wish. Final angel is gone. And, that was Shinji's mission also. So, why is it not that simple? Why does Shinji agonize over this action? Whoops, went too far. Of course I did. And so Shinji agonized it. So the narration rephrases it in a very simplified way. He wanted this, you gave it to him. Your mission is to kill angels. You kill the angel. What seems to be the problem? And so what the title cards do now, to begin with, is they're asking him this question: why did you kill him? And despite being unvoiced, right? Despite no one saying it, the repetition, they take on this accusatory tone. We can almost hear the unrelenting pursuit. What is the answer to that question? Why did you kill him? And Shinji will give answers. I might have skipped past it. Nope. Shinji will try to give answers, and the questions will continue. He'll insist he doesn't have a choice. He'll insist he was an angel. He can't satisfy the query. And this is going to happen repeatedly throughout these things, where the narrative voice, either as text or as someone else coming in to speak them, will keep asking a question. And and it's not necessarily the fact that most of them seem kind of distressed or make excuses or otherwise try to, they're shrinking from it. And so the question becomes almost like almost like a cross-examination, like trying to get at the actual truth of things. And one of the results of having it be text, the times it is that we don't assign these questions or statements to a particular character, which means we don't read any motive into them based on what we know of a character and why they might be asking such things, right? So this will happen a few times, but when a character asks something or makes an accusation that seems hypocritical, we feel the same way. Usually it'll get pointed out too. But another part of the technique of using the text is the question exists in and of itself, right? Like the question's validity doesn't depend on who's asking it or why they're asking it, right? And so the questions get to stand on their own, right? If they are valid questions, if it's a valid thing to ask, it is because of what is being asked, not as who is doing the asking, right? And so we see this with Shinji in the first thing. Why did you kill him? I didn't have a choice. He was an angel. And his answers aren't just calm, oh, I didn't have a choice. They are shouted in defiance. And the question, by its repetition, by saying it over and over again, implies that none of his answers are satisfactory. And so to the excuse that he was an angel comes just a new question. Wasn't he just as human as you are? And again, yelling, defiance, right? Not calm, oh, well, no, he's an angel, not like me, right? And so the question hammers at him again, and he continues to defy this. And so, all right, so here's an example where it's just the disembodied question kind of hammering at him, right? And his reaction says that there is, oh, thank you. I can't get used to that. That yes, that this is not a question, this is not an answer to this question that he is comfortable with, that he's not confident in this, that he is trying to perhaps even convince himself, okay? And so what will happen in this instance is, assuming I put the mark in the right place, is now the question gets embodied, or the line of questioning gets embodied by Rei. Because the context of her pointing out that he was a person just like me changes the statement, right? That changes the nature of the question. Let me reset my audio. Hold on. Maybe. And so now the fact that this is coming out of Rei's mouth, or the voice is being personified in Rei. We know Kaoru and Rei had a lot in common. And so if Kaoru is not as human as you are, then isn't the same true of Rei? So now that question and the follow-up statement here of you killed him takes on a different context, because would you have done the same to me? By putting this in Rei's mouth, so you killed him, so you would have killed me, right? And so Shinji's cognitive dissonance is thus ramped up, and then Rei actually recedes and lets the narration text hammer at him again, right? And so obviously he's not content with his answer, which is why he gets to this. I didn't put a mark for it, but essentially the hammering at him, he eventually will push back, right? So that is that opening exchange between the narrator and Shinji, whatever you want to say the narrator is. That is a lot of the pattern we'll see repeated throughout, okay? So we're not going to spin that frame by frame going through everybody, because we'd be here all day. But that is the basic pattern, where sometimes the questions or statements will come from the disembodied voice of the narrator, if you will. And so the question itself has to stand on its own merits, and sometimes it will be put into the mouth of another character. And so the fact that they're the ones saying it, like Ray there, changes the nature of the question or the statement, or at some points putting it in a lot of people's mouths, having a group discussion that has an effect too. It's a different effect, but so does that make sense? It is not universally this way always, but that is in this opening exchange. I think they're telling you how to understand the interplay between the narrator title cards and the avatars of people who will point up to hammer things home, right? So that is how I interpret like the structure of this as far as how the exchange are actually working. Okay. So something else that will happen, this is a much longer example, this opening example, is that little first interrogation will give way to the final scene from the previous episode, where he's sitting on the shoreline and talking about how if only one of them could survive, he wishes it had been Kaoru, right? This is the thing we talked about before, this feeling like he was a better person and not understanding why he had to... I guess what I'm pointing out, or trying to point out, is him in the interrogation there that was insisting that he had no choice, everyone would have died, he was an angel, all these things, is in contrast with that Shinji, the member. He's trying to give voice in this scene to the conflict he feels over killing someone they thought should have lived on instead of this. And here he's putting it out where Misato can hear it and weigh in and maybe tell him what to think, right? But in the opening little narration, he's defiantly asserting that he did the right thing. Yet both of those are his thoughts about the same event. And so we have the isolated, sitting on the chair, dark room, strange floor pattern under him, which all suggests to the audience internal debate, right, that is taking place in someone's mind, is linked to an actual event in Shinji's life, an actual memory. Okay. Now I'm going to say cognitive dissonance like 1,000 times, I'm sure. But that is the basic crisis here in this opening setup, that he holds two contradictory beliefs in his head at the same time. So that is something else we will see as part of this, is that very frequently, we won't go through all of them because, again, we'll be here all day, is that characters' cognitive dissonance will, what they're trying to say to the voice or argue with themselves, will often connect to some particular instance in their memory where that dissonance was introduced, basically. Does that make sense? That is basically the... So that is, yeah. So we'll have voiceless narration. It'll occasionally not be voiceless, and that usually, and then sometimes that also will be what connects it to a specific event, rather than it being just kind of some general wool gathering, right? It's just some general musing stripped of all context. So the tack of the questions, or let's say title cards, or whoever is playing that role in scene, seems to usually be about getting at the heart of whatever that dissonance is for that character. Okay? Not even necessarily about solving the dissonance. I think sometimes it could even be more about hammering at the answers until they seem weaker and weaker. Right? So, again, won't go through that much for all of those, but that is how I see the structure for, a good episode and a third of all this. So, let me just go back to chat here. So the next thing the voice wants to know is what Shinji is afraid of. Is it himself? Is he afraid of being rejected? If so, by who? By his father? Is he afraid of his father? What if he's hated? What should he do if he is hated? The question of what he should do if he is hated, all right, seems to be answered by being transported to this foggy, indistinct forest, right? And as he's sitting there, he starts to realize that he is utterly alone. And maybe we can read into it that is the answer he's given to the question, that he can avoid having to wonder what to do if he's hated, if there is no one around to hate him. But when he realizes there is no one around, he instead gets panicked. He instead calls out to basically everyone he can think of in that moment, to Misato, Asuka, to Rei, even to his father, even to his deceased mother and deceased Kaji, asking for someone to tell him what to do, right? And so removing anyone's ability to hate him by removing anyone also removes any chance there's someone around to tell him what to do, right? So what actually answers him is not any of those characters, but is Unit 1. And then he finds himself in the same position as Karu, right? That first event that's fixed in his mind. And so most recently, piloting this meant having to kill someone that he liked, right? If that's what piloting it means to him, does he still have to pilot it? Like, is he supposed to? Yeah. Is he supposed to keep piloting it, even at that cost, for all the pain it's caused him to this point? Now it really is. Now the costs have become especially sharp, right? And so this time he actually demands that his mother, as Unit 1, be the one to answer him. But I think the point is that he wants someone else to give him the answer to this. What is he supposed to do? And that is the next thing, I believe, that the narrator is going to hammer him over. Why? Yeah. It's kind of a progression of thoughts. Why do you pilot the Ava? Why do you pilot? And he's, because they tell me to do it. Because everyone praises me when I do it. To help everyone. That's what it is. I pilot to help everybody. Isn't that good? Isn't that a great thing? I think is how he says it. Yeah. And it's like he's trying to convince himself. But of course, the way it's done is not calmly. It's him shouting and in defiance. Everybody takes care of me. So now the voice takes on the aspect of Asuka, who gives a little context. That she says that what he's doing is actually out of self-interest. He's doing this out of the hopes that he will be needed by others, right? It's a dependency on those others, hoping that they will shore up his loneliness. And now, while he was defiant to the voice, right? He argued back, justified as whatever. When it actually is Asuka, who he's arguing with, he's not defiant, right? He is docile, right? He's actually listening. He takes what she's saying under advisement, right? So here is an instance where the context of it coming from Asuka changes the way he reacts to it. Okay, so that is, I think that is important for the kind of later conclusion that he treats the information differently with the context of Asuka. That Asuka here, because he knows her and has a different reaction to thoughts that come from her versus from himself or from the ether, is letting him figure out more about himself, right? And of course, it's partially that it's Asuka. Sorry, it's not just Asuka. It's also that this is what he wanted. He wanted someone to tell him what to do, tell him what to think. And so you can see in this, even this exchange, Shinji is dependent, or maybe benefits from, or otherwise is more amenable to information that comes from somebody else. That someone besides him is helping him figure out himself. Okay, and that's pretty critical to the final conclusion, right? The kind of final argument. And so now she will finally accuse him of, and Shinji doesn't get to have all the fun here, right? She will occasionally, she'll eventually accuse him sitting around waiting for someone else to bring happiness, false happiness, and now Ray will pop up to point out the hypocrisy here, and we'll switch to Asuka instead. Now, switching into Asuka, again, I'm just trying to build the argument here as if you hadn't already watched both of them and are coming back to talk about them, is the very first thing with Asuka is we see her back in Unit 2, curled up, underwater, and she herself is wondering how she got there. She didn't remember it. She doesn't know why she's back in it. This concludes that she must have been forced into it. We're definitely confused in the audience, because while Shinji's internal dialogue seemed like it could be taking place somewhere around his conversation with Misato on the shoreline, this imagery of Asuka in Unit 2, we don't know when or where this is. So we are one more step down the path of feeling groundless like the characters. Like we don't have a frame of reference for what we're seeing here, because this is the defeated, self-loathing Asuka that we last left off with in a situation we don't recognize. So I think this is the first time in these episodes that suggests that there are events actually happening somehow around what's going on inside, what's going on in these dark room, arguing with title cards or ghostly apparitions of characters you know, right? So now, the same way that Asuka, being the person who voices those objections to Shinji, has an impact on Shinji. This time it is Rei who is doing the voicing to Asuka, and that will also have an impact on her in a different way, but it's a different net effect than just hearing it from the narrator, the unspecified title cards. And what Rei accuses her of is looking to others to define herself, which I think we pretty well know. And we'll continue. She's the same thing. You see the title cards flashing in there. She is serving the same role as the narrator voice, all right? Now, what that narrator voice, that's your own debate. Is that that could mean several things, but what accused her, won't go through the whole thing, but accused her of looking to others to define herself, worried about that no one will need her, that if everyone else goes away, that she will too. And unlike Shinji, who becomes more compliant to what's being said when it's Asuka, when it's Rei delivering this to Asuka, it makes Asuka defiant. It makes her push back. And so what she will say is she doesn't want to hear that kind of crap from a doll like Rei, which connects to Rei's personal hang-up, right? The third case, it says. And being accused of a doll for her triggers this idea of who am I? Who is the person named Rei? And for her versions of narrators will be other versions of herself. Rei 1, Rei 2, Rei 3, the Rei that was the angel that invaded her mind. And even her answers here are very kind of doll-like. They don't dispel the and again, like, we're not gonna go through it, but like that connects to the scene in the elevator, right, where each person's individual crisis, as illustrated through this experience in their mind, connects to some event, some memory they have. Anyway, but with Rei, she's an object called Rei Ayanami. We are all objects called Rei Ayanami, right? And so why should that be? And the answer seems to be that's because what other people call us. Other people call all of us Rei Ayanami. So she is being defined from the outside. Everyone calling her Rei Ayanami means that all of those different versions of her form the concept of Rei Ayanami. But more importantly to the overall thing, is this another example of defining herself from the outside, from the external, needing other people to set the boundaries of who you are. All these people call us Rei Ayanami, therefore we must all be Rei Ayanami. But she's not at peace with herself about this, right? Because they're accusing her of being a fake object, fake soul, a fake thing pretending to be human. And then as though to kind of drive that home, I'll just show you this slowed down, it's easier to see. As one of them accusing her of this will go through a brief kind of distortion where she goes from being colored to black and white. And when that happens, she suddenly looks a lot more like Yui, right? So that undermines the idea that she's not fake, that she's not someone else's. She's pretending to be human. And so when she's stripped of color like this, she doesn't look like Rei anymore. She looks like Yui. But now, the Rei voice. Oh, there's a better one, actually. You can see. Anyway, let me reset the audio again. Honestly. I'll make you watch me dig for it. But Rei as Rei 2 actually has a pretty good answer to this, right? Where she says that she has become the person, she's become myself. I'm sorry. I've become myself over the time I've existed, through the connections I've formed with others. The person I am is shaped by my interactions with others. So it's actually kind of agreeing with the idea that everyone calls her Rei Ayanami, therefore we all are, that we are being defined from the outside, but she is taking it one step further there, that it's not just observation, rather it is the way she has interacted with everybody. And what the narrator voice then asks is, are those links, right? That those are the links that are created, the person that I've been, that creates the object known Rei Ayanami. If you remember, the links was the thing she gave as an answer back when Shinji asked her why she piloted the Eva, because it's her link to everyone. That her interactions with other people form the shape of her heart, and that is her link to everyone. Which all this seems, all well and good. This actually does seem like unlike the other two, she's not shouting in defiance, right? With these questions, but not so fast, because they bring up that there is another you, there is another real you, and you are avoiding her. You don't want to see her, and you subconsciously avoid her because she might not be human in shape, I believe is what she's going to say. And what you're afraid of, right? Is that the person you've been will vanish. That who you are at this point will disappear. If the person in you, the thing she's detecting that's not specifically her, right? Which is, not exactly explained to us, but if the real her is not the person she perceives herself to be, that she's worried she will vanish out of everyone's heart, right? It talks about whether it's scary to disappear or not. And what Ray actually says here, is that no, that would make her happy. That she wants to die. That she has wanted actually to return into nothingness, and yet that man, obviously meaning Gendo, simply won't let her. That she cannot go back because he needs her. Now the time has arrived where soon enough he won't need her anymore. The thing for which he needed her is going to come to pass. And he won't be needed, he's going to be abandoned by her. So, even Rei, in this instance, finally, we get around to the point where what she has become afraid of over time is being abandoned. It's more obvious with Shinji and Asuka, right, for their different reasons, and then with Misato later on. But Rei, who has seemed to long for nothingness and death, now finally also can admit that she fears being abandoned. She fears fading away. Yes, the three of them they're insecure kind of the same way, but if they've arrived there from different journeys. But for her, she'd always longed for the day she would disappear, but now that it's here, she's afraid. And part of it is, now that she's actually made these connections, now that she has become the person who has become who she is over time, and the connections she has made with other people, now there is a part of her she doesn't want to disappear, I think. And then so from a completely different angle, she comes to the same conclusion, basically, that she, for all these people who have so many hang-ups with their self-confidence and their sense of self-worth, still wanting to persist, and this is talked about some later, but I think we're probably going to skip that. They have to have some, like Rei here, has some sense of value in the person she has become, which is why she has the anxiety of it disappearing, right? Of being abandoned. And while they will occasionally argue that they deserve that, they're not worth anything, there has to be this intrinsic belief that there is some value to care that they're being abandoned, right? I think for Rey, it's much more obvious in this. But we finally get a clue to what the heck is going on in these episodes, thanks to Rey and Gendo, who finally actually shows up to be a voice. And he tells her that this is the day that she was born for. And the narrator card will tell us that instrumentality has begun. So now we know. This is more than just the characters having a strange internal dialogue. That now the human instrumentality that we've heard about all this time is actually taking place, right? It doesn't clear things up exactly, but we at least now understand why this is such a departure from what we've seen before, and it will explain to us essentially what instrumentality is. But now we know this is not just the characters all closed off having a debate with themselves, right? So the first clue, Shinji we go back to Shinji, and we see him nude, huddled down, and talking about the sensation that he is feeling, and that he's felt it before, like the lines of his body are melting away. And I think what he's felt before, what he's talking about here, is that moment when he achieved 400% sync rate with the Unit 1 or whatever, when they talked about his ego boundaries disappeared, and he kind of became one with the LCL inside the entry plug, right? And I think that's what he's talking about. I remember the sensation before, and he talks about it feels nice, right? I've tried really hard to point out how often silhouettes are used in the series, how often visuals involve just really obviously shadows framed by whatever it is they're cast on, or a foreground character is silhouetted against some kind of background. Over and over in the series, silhouettes are prominent. And I think that has been an important thing to this eventual instrumentality thing, because what a silhouette is it's the outline, right? The thing that forms its shape is the boundary between where the thing casting the shadow ends and the whole rest of the world begins, right? And so within instrumentality, those borders dissipate, right? There are no more silhouettes, right? Which also means there is no more way to define where one person ends and another begins, right? And so I think the silhouetting, I'm not sure there even is any use of silhouetting in this, right? Shinji's experience of the sensation is that he is spreading out, that he's getting bigger, and then the narration will again pop in, this time talking to us, that is how it began for everyone, right? I'll try to go slowly. With the parts that they were missing, the hearts they had lost, the emptiness in their hearts was filled. And the narrator is again, who is the narrator? Because Gendo will pop in to argue, right? That it's not returning to nothingness. It's simply returning to its beginning. Now, we'll have a couple images here that again suggest events that are taking place outside whatever it is we're seeing in people's mind, which we have no context for otherwise. But Gendo is phrasing this as, no, this is not a return. This is not to nothingness. This is going back to the beginning. That this is a reset to before. And if you remember his conversation in Antarctica, when he's talking about a world without humans, a world before original sin and all that, it seems like the idea. And the way he drew a parallel to the Garden of Eden, like the beginning of humanity and being cast out and all that, that going back to the beginning like this seems to imply that that is the goal, that he's returning this to a state before that. And yes, we're seeing dead bodies. It is the well, actually, I think, hold on. I actually think I don't have to. Yeah, he says our hearts will become one and we will achieve eternal peace. And Misato and Ritsuko, whose bodies we just saw, well, maybe their bodies, they're injured, but it certainly looks like they're having a bad day, will debate it. And so now, even though we saw that maybe they're dead, they seem to be here. So they will kind of explain a bit to the audience, really, what it is that instrumentality is. That the point was this distance and this emptiness that everyone has and fears is controls their life. They live their life rebelling from it, hiding from it, trying to escape it or banish it. And it is the kind of justification for what's going on. That this is an intrinsic part of the human experience, and it can't just be solved. And so instrumentality is an attempt to actually solve it, right? By merging everyone's hearts together. Hold on. Wherever it is that he talks about it. Yeah. So you think we should merge everyone's hearts together to get them to make each other whole, right? To fill up the gaps. And what Misato gets upset about is the lack of consent. Which we'll come back to. But basically, instrumentality in Evangelion is what's known as an assimilation plot. Everyone is merged together into a single thing, becoming a single entity. And there's lots, anime loves this especially. It definitely shows up in a lot of shows. Yeah, unfortunately, and I won't name them because, as you are pointing out instrumentality as something in other series is potentially spoilerific. But suffice to say, it exists. It exists a lot, and assimilation here is is what Evangelion's been building to. It seems that the behind-the-scenes plan, the human instrumentality project, and all the stuff we saw Zila and Gendo do, and we don't know why there's a divide between why they seem to be doing things or how they seem to be trying to do it. But we know the human instrumentality project was something they both worked towards, and now we see what it is. Now, like I mentioned, lots of anime, lots of stories have an assimilation plot, okay? And if you were here for one of the all spoilers discussions, this is something I've already talked about, so sorry. But a lot of those other stories that use assimilation plots, it's just the thing that usually the villain is trying to bring about for some reason that they'll explain to the hero. All right. And it's pretty easy to root for the heroes to stop it from happening or to overturn it, depending on the way it, the version of it. But in Evangelion, the entire show to this point is almost an exploration of why instrumentality might be a good idea. Like why the assimilation plot would seem like a good idea to someone. Because what we see over and over again is characters presented the opportunity to close the gap between them, to fill up these empty places in their heart with other people, and fail repeatedly. Fail from their own sense of lack of self-worth, from their own anger, from their own abandonment issues. Over and over again, Evangelion gives us all these examples of why people can't fix this themselves, that it's a problem without a solution. That the distance between people cannot be overcome. And so making us go through all that, when we finally find out what the Human Instrumentality Project is, it's not coming out of left field why someone would think, assimilation, not simulation. The fact that someone would think this is a good idea, to assimilate everyone together, to strip away individuality, if it means overcoming this divide that seems to exist in everyone, it's no longer just a villain has a big enough plot to make the story big, right? Now it's actually a potential answer to the problems we've seen all along. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not a just because this is what we do, we're evil and we do. Now it actually seems like a very almost like it comes from a place of compassion, like seeing all this pain of people around, seeing the distance, watching everyone around them even struggle with this. And here is potentially a solution. Here is potentially a way to actually stop all this pain. And so stripping away those barriers, and series over and over the barriers, silhouettes, the barriers between people, the actual AT fields being this inviolable distance that no one can cross without it being a violation, has an answer. It has an easy answer, rather. It has a way to be solved for all time. And so, of assimilation plot stories, I feel like Evangelion, certainly more than anything before this that I'm aware of, even some sci-fi stories that have used it, I don't feel did as good a job of giving us a good reason to consider it, right? To maybe this is a problem without another solution. Yeah. Now, so that's my tangent on how Evangelion uses the assimilation plot. Now that we know for sure what human instrumentality is, now the story building up to this, having so much emotional relationship damage, no longer seems like it's just to tweak us in the audience. Like it's no longer just to add an unnecessary conflict or drama. It's actually building up to one side of the argument for assimilation, for dropping the barriers between people, right? So, anyway, but it doesn't just end, everyone's assimilated and happy, right? And Misato argues back against this idea that doing it without everyone's consent, right? You know, what gives you the right that you're forcing people to cozy up to each other? But that is something Misato herself longed for. Something she herself has done, which means that that personal stake connecting to her own life means we're going to switch to focus on her for a minute. Now it's going to start off with Shinji explaining that this is my heart inside of yours, and she'll explain that this is also my heart inside of yours. I think what that should probably remind everyone of is that train discussion when we were in Shinji's mind, where his other self, or potentially the angel masquerading as him, depending on how you want to read that, talked about how there is an idea of, a version of Shinji that exists in everyone that knew him. That there is a Shinji in him, there's a Shinji that lives in Misato and Rei and Asuka, and in reverse. There are versions of all those people who live in him as well. And at the time, it talks about what he was afraid of was that person in the others that partially He's worried about how they are forming that that version of him, the him that lives in each of them, but also because of his self-worth problems, worried that the version that he really is, like, which is actually the him that lives in him, that version would be a disappointment, that it would not live up to the version of him that lives in other people, which is just kind of at the time I pointed out, it's such a great way to visualize confidence problems, or self-esteem problems. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. I have a lot to talk about, so I'm trying to read what y'all are saying, but I won't diverge too much. Now, so that is what this I think I should remind us of. One of the things he talks about, though, if I can get it to play, yes, yeah, okay. What Shinji says is that for him to find himself, he needs to interact with lots of different people, right? And so, in context of us experiencing things, at this moment, we do seem to kind of be jumping around and experiencing how each of these characters is internalizing mentality. But this trying to figure out, in order to find myself, I need to interact with lots of different people. It's the same thing Ray was saying a minute ago. But in this, what they seem to be doing, and you can argue, this is why I wonder about the narration. Who is this narrator? For each of them to figure out themselves, maybe they are having conversations not with the other person in reality, but the versions of those people who live in them, right? It's like all these little versions of you, which are as real as any other, are having a chat, basically. And because of what it will conclude later, you can look at this as that is how they're trying to figure out who they are, by talking to the versions of other people in them that are not them. Even if that's not like exactly the way that person sees themselves, that earlier train conversation placed it didn't privilege one version or the other. It said that all of them are the real you, right? Yeah, kind of like what you are saying. Like, yes, that they're talking to the version they have inside them. I think that is pretty well implied by that this is my heart in you and your heart in me. And so I think that is a good argument for who the narrator voice is in all these exchanges, because each of them also has a version of themselves who lives in them, right? That was one other thing. It's not just other people. Anyway, in trying to examine these other people and trying to, and he connects the two thoughts together. Sorry, I don't know why I stopped playing that. That actually made my point better. For me to find myself, I need to interact with lots of different people. I need to take a good look inside myself, right? He needs to look at the Misato inside him. And so what he begins with is, what do you wish for, right? What do you want? What drives you? And we're not going to go totally through Misato's bit. It is pretty interesting. There's especially this little bit. She's trying to explain how does she get to be the person who used her sexuality and her relationship with men as such a important part of her psyche. Like, why did that become an important part and sometimes a weakness to her? And it gives us a nice explanation that she, in her unhappy home life, it was hammered into her that she has to be a good girl, that she has to be pretty and clean. And it's just a great bit of imagery. I just want to show it. We're not going to dwell on it. Where she's answering essentially as, I guess, as a photograph of herself. And every time it flashes back to the hammering, it has been torn in half and taped back together, right? You see the one tape there and the one rip flashes to these other images and comes back, though, you've seen it's been ripped up more and then also taped back together again. And what she's explaining kind of over this is her own cognitive dissonance here. I said I'd say it a lot, right? I think, anyway, the tearing apart of that image of herself and taping it back together is essentially that cognitive dissonance. That she is supposed to be a good girl, she wants to help mommy, all this, but she knows that mommy is unhappy. She doesn't want to turn out like mommy. She's doing all this because it's supposed to make things easier for her, for her dad, for all this, and she's hoping her dad won't hate her, but at the same time, she actually hates her father. She hates being good because of how it connects to how she feels about her father. And so the ripping up of the picture and taping it back together, I thought was a very nice visual of that, her own self-image. That she's supposed to be one thing, this good girl in the picture, and she keeps ripping it up and trying to throw it away, but not. She tapes it back up. But every time it's a little bit more distorted. It's a little less clear. The cracks are more obvious, more pronounced, harder to ignore, I guess. So you're asking about why she wanted to break free of the clean image and all that. It's complicated, right? Because she's being a good girl to an end that she doesn't value. I think that it's coming from outside. It's not what she would choose. A way of proving her autonomy and proving that she is able to make her own choices is to do the opposite of being clean and pretty. I think is what she said. She's tired of being clean and pretty, tired of keeping up with the pretense of being clean and pretty. And so this becomes a rebellion, essentially. It's not a very healthy or mature reaction, but that external pressure to be a good girl and the reasons she's having to be cause that dissonance because she doesn't value the end goal of not upsetting her father or making things easier for her mother, but she doesn't want to turn out like her mother because her mother cries all the time. And so, so the somewhat promiscuous is not the right word because for all we know, Kaji is it, but the sexually forward, alcoholic, slovenly Misato, all of those are a rejection of that clean and pretty, obedient, good girl. And it all comes from she associated having to do those things because it was for her father or for her father's sake, and then hating her father because of how he makes her feel abandoned and hurts her mother and all these other things. So why is she going to behave this way? She doesn't see the value in being good and pretty and clean, whatever she says, for its own sake. It's something forced upon her, and so she rejects it when she can. And so to reject it as far as possible means to sully herself, to be made to feel dirty, to feel like she is. And it's not because she wants to feel dirtiness in and of itself, I think, but because that proves that she is making those decisions, that she is choosing it, that it defies the things that were chosen for her. Yes, not promiscuous, but definitely sexually forward. It's very deriving a lot of delight in the attention of men and flirting and all that. Yeah, it's about setting up expectations for herself. Now, she swings too hard, right? I mean, this causes just a different problem for her. Just whiskey. We don't have to cover everything she does. I think that's the kind of the broad strokes of it. But what does happen is, while she reveled in it at the time, and even has it say, when it's the idea of Shinji seeing what's going on, him watching her sully herself, I think as she puts it. She suddenly does feel shame about it. She suddenly does feel embarrassed about it, right? Suddenly it does seem embarrassing. And they're trying, why is this embarrassing? Why was it okay to show this to Kaji but not to Shinji? And it'll then accuse her of wanting to show it to Shinji, but more importantly, wanting to show it to her father, right? I might have clipped that, yeah. That it's really your father you want to show this to, this dirtying, this sullying. That she was looking for all the things she didn't get from her father in Kaji, but doing it in such a way that her father would not have liked, and that is bucking the constraints she felt under. Yes. Anyway, we don't have to run through all of that. But at the end of this whole bit with Misato, it's kind of interesting, but we can't spend all day on this. She does eventually, run away from Kaji, and she says that part of why she ran away is that she was happy, which I know seems counterintuitive. And I think there's moments of utter bliss. I'll show you. There are moments of utter bliss, and that's why I hated it. Right? That's why she broke up with him. She was doing all this to be defiant and started to like it, started to become part of how she derived happiness. But it's still she doesn't, it's a dissonance. She doesn't actually want to, she doesn't want to be dirty for the sake of feeling dirty and sullied. And so when that makes her happy, it's alarming, right? That she shouldn't feel happy for that's wrong and bad, right? And so, again, the cognitive dissonance, and again, it connects directly to her confessing some of these things to Kaji. That's the memory she associates with this. So that's just a continuing of our pattern. And the very end of all this, we will have somewhere. Kaji says she's trying to hurt herself because she hates who she is in that moment. And she has this whole commentary about men. That's what they do, that they just work. They always run away from a harsh reality. And saying that, she thinks about what it is she's saying. The men are always running away, right? And this is actually something she talked about with her father earlier in the series, that he couldn't deal with the reality of her and her mother. I think she was admitting that to Shinji. And talks about how they run away from this harsh reality. And having said that, she thinks, well, what is the harsh reality? And in this case, it must be me. I'm the harsh reality. Well, yeah, it must be me. Just look at me. Could anyone blame someone who would want to get away from me, who would want to run from me? Then there's a moment where she remembers trying to touch Shinji's hand and him pulling away, and her realizing that was just her reaching for someone, anyone. And again, like lots of people will jump in to putting all these thoughts into the voices of these characters gives another impact. Everyone looking down on her, oh, she's indecent and filthy. She's smutty and gross and all these things that they're really how she feels, right? And so to feel happy for that it's worse, right? Because she believes these things they're saying. And the she that is respected, it talks about her promotion and all this, the she that she is respected, but the she which is respected by everyone else is a character she plays as well. That she is, 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 she That's not the real her. That is not who she considers herself. She considers all these things to be fronts. But the real her is always crying. And she'll argue that she's happy instead. The argument of the voice happens a lot in episode 25, right? Yeah, some base part of her still values being the good girl, and so enjoying not being the good girl creates this dissonance. And so she will insist for a while that she is happy, but will eventually realize that she's not. This is not happiness. And now the voice hammers her over your happiness. And Shinji, kind of figuring this out, is trying to parse why that would be. And again, we get the Congo line of people answering all this to her. That she's doing all these things because of her loneliness, because of her anxiety. It doesn't matter who it is. Which is, if that's true, it's terrible anyway, but it's terrible also to do that to other people, right? To do that to Kaji, and then later to do it to Shinji. Yeah, you don't care who it is, so long as it's someone, which is an indictment of her, but it's also the fact that she does that to other people who maybe don't understand that it doesn't matter to her is another thing to feel guilty about, right? And so her little case there begins and ends with the same thing, wondering what is it she could be wishing for? What is it that she actually wants? Right? And so he hasn't come away with an answer. Right? Yeah, it's a big crisis, for sure. I mean, it's a difficult... abandonment issues are manifest themselves in very complicated ways in people. So anyway, the same thing will happen with Asuka. She'll be case 2. Same deal. This is my heart inside of your heart inside of mine. And I believe he again begins with the same question. What is it that you wish for? Or was it you wish? I can't remember how it's phrased exactly. Yes, what do you wish for? We're just gonna kind of not skip over Asuka, but we've actually gotten to cover a lot more because of how much she was represented in those last few episodes. But there are familiar refrains. She has that fear of being unwanted, fear of having no one who looks at her, of trying to figure out why the little girl inside her is still crying when she was so sure she was going to stop crying. That there's a bit where we kind of again get a little more context from the stepmother, her relationship with what I think is the doctor there was for her original mother. To make it one step worse, I'm sure she associates the two events. But that woman will talk about, and the way it's phrased, here I'll just show you. The way it's phrased with, the way it is framed with Asuka looking downcast and looking away seems to imply that she is hearing all this, that she hears these things that her stepmother is saying. And one of the things she is saying is that I'm actually your wife first. And while you can't stop being her father, I can stop being her mother at any point, which is to say that she can choose to walk away, right? And that, it's a terrible thing for a kid to hear. But it's a terrible perspective from her, because if that's where she starts from, that I can turn this off at any point, there's a definite ceiling to what kind of mother figure she ever could be, right? And so when Asuka talks about it just being a superficial relationship, I mean, spot on. That is as far as it'll ever be. If she already has 1 foot out before starting, she's never actually going to be. She's never going to fill the now mother-shaped hole in Asuka's heart, right? And Asuka knows this, right? So yeah, losing her mother, losing the potential for a surrogate mother, right? Because there's no one else that can step into that role since her father married this person. Yeah. Anyway, that's new. That little exchange did not show up in the before, so that's why I wanted to point it out, because it just makes her complex a little bit more understandable. But that's just one step furtherly tragic. Furtherly, whatever I said. And maybe even worse. And I stopped on this, but I'll bring it up. That Asuka, despite that, still wishes she would be her mommy. Please don't stop being mommy. I'll be a good girl. I'll be someone you love. Don't stop being my mommy. So, Asuka, despite I think understanding that it's a opt-in role for her stepmom, still really wishes for that because it's all she's got. And she'll be good if necessary. She'll do these things. But once again, this is maybe not the earliest example. Her real mother is, but this is another example of Asuka trying to reach for a connection to someone, trying to make a relationship with someone who can't give her what she needs. And so Shinji will later be the same pattern, right? And so she'll pretend she doesn't need it, right? That becomes her, you kind of understand why that becomes her defense mechanism. She's so worried about being a nuisance or unwanted. I'll show you, like her mother with the doll. And this becomes like an existential angst for her. Alone among the characters we roll through here, Asuka expresses a fear of death, right? And so I think partially just because of her mother dying and the best things, but yeah, yeah, exactly. It's not a real relationship she has with her stepmother. It comes out of this being a good girl and fulfilling the things expected of her. But that, I think, comes from a central anxiety of being abandoned, of being, for her, abandonment, where we talk about don't kill me, don't let me die. For her, abandonment lies side by side with the fear of death itself, with her own mortality, just because of her mother's situation there. And so Asuka develops then this defense mechanism of not letting herself be abandoned, where she will make it hard for someone to get close enough that she could feel that, right? Because it has such a mortal terror for her. And again, I think we once again have the terrible thing where she finds her mother, right? She is the one that finds her mother's suicide. And her mother is happy. She's smiling. And she hates that. I mean, you kind of wonder if that makes Asuka distrust happiness forever, right? So, yeah, like I say, it was a murder-suicide. Like, there was the doll, too, that she actually intended to kill them both. And so there is a again, the fear of death lies side by side with the fear of abandonment for thing. Yeah, so later day is not going to be death rebirth exactly. It will be death true squared, which is, as far as I can tell, is almost pure recap. So that's really just going to be like a loose question and answer. Make sure everyone's caught up before we go into Evangelion. It's going to be very short. Yeah, I know. I just wanted to specify also. Yeah, so why she hate it when other people are happy? Does she distrust happiness? She puts on the happy front, so maybe it's not that she distrusts happiness in a general way, but she definitely hates the happy look on her mother. Yeah, and so does she hate seeing happiness in other people? In the moments where it reminds her of that, I imagine so. We don't have any context before this to know if this is something that's always on her mind. This is the first time we have that commentary from her. But you understand then, at least, that Asuka has a very complicated relationship to the concept of happiness and the concept of connecting to other people. And what she will try to insist on... I took my notes too far, sorry. She says that she doesn't need anyone. She doesn't need boys. She doesn't need mom or dad. She doesn't want anyone. And then in the same breath complains that no one will protect her or no one will be with her, right? And so again, the question, what does she wish for? What is the way she's dealing with this? And she intends to live on her own. Again, because of this fear of abandonment, she will live on her own, but it's hard. She doesn't want to be alone. She wants to live on her own. She doesn't want the risk of abandonment, but she doesn't actually want to be alone. Again, it's kind of like Kaoru was talking about last time, where you have a choice between setting yourself up for betrayal or being hurt by others and that pain, or the choice of being lonely and that pain. And so Asuka here, conflictingly, what she's saying in her mind, and you're saying the same thing, that she only wants people if they will fulfill those things she needs from them, right? She wants the option to pick and choose. If someone's going to accept her totally, then okay. But if they're not totally on board, if they're a risk for abandonment, or she's going to put effort into them and they won't hold her or protect her or these things, then she'd rather push them away. So this causes this dissonance in her mind about she wants some perfect, ideal version of someone. That's the whole, I think, attachment to Kaji. She can't realistically ever be with Kaji, and so she can't realistically ever be abandoned by him in the way that someone like Shinji could. So he becomes this fantasy notion of someone she can try to attach to. Yes, she's hoping someone will solve her problems for her, basically. She's just like Shinji in that manner. Despite how proactive versus reactive the two of them seem to be, they both have this wish that if only someone could solve that. And so that'll eventually dump us into this final little scene. Now we've gone through those two cases of the three of them on stage. Don't abandon me. Don't cast me aside. Don't kill me. Those are the three, what each of them says. That's the fear each of them expresses. And so they're out there talking about, is this what this is? This is instrumentality? And it's part of it. And I guess we have a whole bunch of characters who will contribute a single line, essentially, to trying to explain that this is kind of what instrumentality looks like. And basically we're talking about facts and truth and the changeable nature. Like one person will say, there isn't a truth. What you have is lots of facts. And the way you orient yourself to those facts becomes truth, becomes your truth. And I feel like, this is, by having each of them contribute a line, it's like you're emphasizing this instrumentality, everyone coming together, everyone problem solving, right? But one of the things I think is unusual, we will skip ahead to it, is finding out that this is the outcome Shinji wished for. That this is what he wanted for destruction, for a world that can't be saved. And then as the voices continue, we come to learn that this appears to be a world that is made up of the things in Shinji's heart, like things that were given to him, things that he wished for. Like the private reality of each soul, the individual way that Shinji is experiencing reality in this world hasn't become his impression. Like, it's no longer just his impression of the way how things work, but the actual way they work. That this world that he is in, at least, is all made up of the way he thinks things exist. Not actuality, not reality necessarily, but a series of facts that he has constructed into his own version of truth. And it's not a world where things are decided for him, even though he kind of says that's pretty... that's probably how he felt about actual reality. In this world, he has to be the one who makes the decisions. And for the moment, the world he's wished for is one that has closed everything off. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah. You wish for a closed-off world that's comfortable for you and only you, to protect your fragile heart. To protect your pleasure, to keep you from having anything that is at risk, right? For anything that could hurt you. You drove away everything that you disliked, and you wished for a lonely world. And Misato delivers the final line of episode 25, which is, "This is the end of the world that you yourself brought about." So, so, a couple things. As far as like trying to orient ourselves to what's going on here. On the one hand, we have this idea that this is before we actually get to 26, which will spell out that this is kind of happening to everyone. This is just Shinji's version, but what we have at this moment is a small implication that Shinji had some role in instrumentality. We don't know what, but that this is the end of the world that you yourself brought about. That's one of the names of that episode is the ending world, or the world about to end, or something like that. It is... So since we don't know what's going on outside, we have to wonder if that means, was Shinji involved in instrumentality compared to how Rei is named as being involved? Or is it just that everyone has their own little world here, and for his own world, he is kind of inadvertently wishing for the end of the world, or at the very least, the end of the world the way he was experiencing it, right? Creating this closed-off world. Yeah, is it his fault that the world is ending, meaning everyone, or is it just his own world, right? And it comes as part of that whole conversation where they are talking about how there are only facts, and your truth is whatever you make, however you orient yourself to those facts, basically. There's some ambiguity there, and using that as the last line is meant to make us wonder. This is the end of the world you yourself brought about. So that will flip us into 26, which begins by spelling out for us that the instrumentality of the people had lost, that is, of the heart, was underway. It would take far too long to depict all such events. Take too long to explain everything that happens in this episode and on this stream too. Therefore, we're going to narrow it down to just Shinji. He becomes Case 3, just like Case 1 was Misato and Case 2 was Asuka. So, sorry, I'm just finding parts I want to talk about here. It starts off with this overwhelming terror that he may disappear, but also this belief that it would be okay if someone like me disappeared. And what's going to happen is the various arguments here and the various answers to what he's saying will be put in the mouth of a variety of other characters and will intermix with their own memories, right? And so this has the feel, again, of an argument he's having with the versions of these people who live in him. Now there's a lot of rehashing of experiences and insecurities he's had through the whole show. So I don't think we'd feel the need to totally re-psychoanalyze Shinji at this point. But what is a little bit different this time is when he pushes back against the voices, the thing I just ended on, accusing Misato of doing exactly the same thing. This time, we're not in her head apparently anymore, and that version of her just takes it. That's right. We're all like that. We're all this way. We all have this terror. We all have this anxiety. That's why we're trying to merge. Why we're trying to make whole, and reiterating that is what instrumentality is. So he knows what the actual stakes are. And so, I mean, I think partially this is spelling it out for the audience too, but by flipping through so many different people's voices, I think that emphasizes that, right? That I think is it Fyosuke, I think, who's even voicing this part? People can't survive unless they're part of a group. They can't live on their own. But in the end, conversely, we are all alone. We all do live individually. So we have to live in a group. We want to be part of a group. We have this desire to connect to other people, and yet everyone's experience is individual, right? That's kind of the part of the philosophical musing here is, or we can go for some Conrad if you want. We live as we dream alone. But there is a fundamental loneliness to existence because you can only experience things from your own perspective. You can never really understand how someone else thinks or what it's like to be someone else. This is that no such thing as perfect negative capability thing that I've talked about a couple times now. That was Gendo. Yeah, I couldn't remember who it was talking. What at least this part of it is trying to say is that this experience is universal because everyone's experience is alone. I'm up here trying to imagine what would be an interesting way to do this stream, and maybe y'all are imagining how it looks from my point of view, or whatever, but you don't know. You don't know what it's like to be on this side of it. Only I do. And that experience is fundamentally lonely. And that's true for every experience we have and every relationship we have. It's like Kaji was trying to explain to Shinji that night they stayed up chatting, that it's an illusion, the idea that you would ever perfectly understand someone else. So that makes experience for every individual have this fundamental loneliness to it, right? But what causes the tension and pain is that we want to connect to others. We want to live in a group. We have to live in a group. We're social animals. And we carry that fundamental can't get outside of our own perspective with us. And it's saying that is why life feels lonely all the time. Um, yeah, exactly. You can't even understand yourself fully most of the time. How in the world could you fully understand someone else's? Um, even they who have actually been through their entire all of their own experiences and their own perspectives, have all their own memories, can't fully understand themselves. How can you without the benefit of that? And so there is an intrinsic divide between people and their ability to understand someone else. And what this is saying is that this is why, whoops, I went too far. This is why life is lonely. That's what drives us to embrace another heart, another body. We want to become one because we're made of, weak and fragile stuff. I know I don't have time to talk about every single little image in here. Most of them are extremely relevant to what's being said at the time. And so it is asserting that part of what drives people to connect, part of to merge together, is to deal with that fundamental loneliness because your perspective is singular, and because and despite being singular, you still cannot totally understand yourself. So that is kind of the philosophical crisis the first part of this episode is setting up, and a lot of what the rest of this episode is, I think, is about answering that question. Sorry. So anyway, I think at this point, this very opening, it kind of lays it out plainly. And I said this at the onset of Evangelion, that a lot of its popularity, even though people reacted in a not universal way to these final episodes, that the things it's trying to get at about the inherent sadness or complexity of the human experience was something people found really relatable, especially the target audience of adolescents, and that contributes a lot to its success. That these talking about this kind of thing on this way, on this level, this wasn't just a show where robots fight monsters. Like, what did I happen into here? But because the whole show is not the narrator and disconnected scenes philosophizing at us, but instead has all these characters we come to care about and root for and worry over and feel empathy towards, all these lessons now at the end, we don't have to even have our internalize it and compare it to our own lives. We have all these examples of people behaving like this about these kind of universal things it's saying now, right? And so we wanted to have this discussion about the fundamental nature of loneliness and self-esteem and just all this. But rather than starting there, it gives us all these examples and all these characters we can relate to. Maybe if we ourselves have never felt quite like this, we at least have characters who are going through it. Like I know, so I was talking about earlier, like Misato's particular crisis is not relatable to everybody, right? Yeah, this is the worst harem anime ever. I don't know what I thought I was signing up for. Anyway, let me just skip ahead to once we actually start answering this question. There is a part, even though we know we're only experiencing this from Shinji's point of view, there is this interesting part where Rei becomes the one voicing the narrative question, which is asking it, and Asuka is answering. When they're trying to answer, why am I alive? Who do I live for? And we're hearing kind of both their answers at once, which is I don't know, it's an interesting, since we're supposed to be just in Shinji's mind, is he answering that on behalf of Misato, on behalf of Asuka, trying to imagine what their answer would be to figure out his own answer. I don't know, I feel like it's left pretty indistinct. Yeah, and we have the red background again, which someone pointed out seems to happen a lot when it's a memory, like that attaches to someone else's memory, maybe. Yeah, I read on this, if we accept that the narrator was telling us the truth, that we're only seeing Shinji's version of this, is that in trying to find the answer to this question, he starts running through imagining how other people might answer that question. And I'm not sure it's clear to us how much of Asuka's trauma is something that Shinji is aware of, right? But anyway, so I don't know if that's it. That is kind of thing. Yeah, the hand holding that I stopped on. The hand holding is like censored, like something that is too intimate to show. But which is just hand holding. But in Shinji's mind, it gets blurred out. Like that's too close. That's too scandalous for him. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of no. It's interesting. It's interesting to to try to wonder if that in Shinji's mind, does he censor even that little bit of affection, that little bit of connecting and intimacy? It's great. I mean, I stopped on it, so you pointed out, but it's like there's so many of those in this. Like the one I'm stopped on just this moment of a phone call, this thing of communication, right? But look at it, the cord's cut. It's a phone that can't ring, right? And that thing's just flashed for a second or two. And this series, these last two episodes are chock full of those. And we would be here all day if we tried to relate everything being said on screen to what's happening behind it. But really, like, in isolation, I know as a conclusion to what came before, this throws people off and people will find it disappointing relative to what they expected. But if you look at these two episodes just by themselves and just really go through them like frame at a time, there's good work here. There's really interesting work here. Yeah, is this just Shinji's mind? I don't know. Who is the narrator voice, right? Is this a unreliable narrator? Is this just some version of the ego talking to other versions of your ego, your inner self? Is this some voice of humanity now having a single voice thanks to instrumentality? I don't know. It doesn't spell it out. We're able to find our own interpretation for that, right? Anyway, during this, whoever it is that asks these questions, whatever that voice is, we get back to the subject of Shinji running away, why he runs away, where the pain comes from, and he's I must not run away, right? And the question is why? Why shouldn't he run away? And now it's like it hurts to run away. It hurts to run, and it hurts to stay for what is painful. But there's pain either way, right? And then the other voice is telling him that it's okay. It's okay to run away. But in the past, you kind of you learned that that it causes pain. And what it's here is talking about, yeah, I'm tired of running. I don't want to run away. We saw several instances where he would not run away when maybe he should have, and bucking his pattern of always running away. But in this case, that seems to be like, yeah, I shouldn't run away. That's it. I should stay and fight. But it's not even as simple as that. Once again, not running away becomes a way to avoid pain. He senses that running away would just bring more pain. So it's still not him staying for the principle of staying, right? Not because he realizes running away is bad, but it becomes, it's just the path of least resistance. It's just the path of least resistance to avoid pain. embracing the idea of not running away is not a virtue in this case. It's him indulging a weakness, right? Yeah, sorry. I'm not going to be able to keep up with both conversations this time. I'm sorry. Anyway, following that path of least resistance will leave Shinji and basically everyone in this divided state where hurts to stay, hurts to move. Should I stay or should I go? And there's pain either way. And so what the narrator voice will try to point out, if I can find it, is... Yeah, here we go. This is where we actually start to get into the answer to all this. That you're not the only one that gets hurt, Shinji. That experience, you're not the only one with problems. And he rebels against it at first, right? But everyone else has had to solve this issue too, right? And again, they'll go through a whole bunch of different voices. And, but Shinji, still at this point, he's still inward focused, and he isn't willing to entertain the idea of relative misery, or that others might understand his pain more than he's willing to admit, or that his crisis is not as singular as he is making it in his mind. It's not actually the whole world against you, Shinji, or Asuka, or whoever. Everyone feels that way. And that can't be true. The whole world can't be individually against each of us, right? And so the idea that his pain isn't singular causes a little bit of lack of purpose in him, this singularity in him. And so he reaches for something else to latch onto, that he is singular, right? That's why I need to pilot the Eva, right? And it's still arguing about his, but the main thing here is that he has to do the pilot the Eva, because that is the thing that makes him, that gives him worth. He feels worthless, he feels he's got nothing to be proud of, but piloting the Eva fixes that. It lets him stay who he is right now, how he feels about himself right now. The same for Asuka. I would keep... Before he piloted the Eva, there was nothing special about him. Okay, so he's once again reaching for something. What makes me singular? If it's going to argue with him and point out that his pain, that his situation is not singular, then something else. Surely something else must make him singular. And he reaches for the Eva pilot. Without it, he has nothing of value, right? And so what he imagines is, again, the thinking his experience is singular. He hates himself, and so he imagines that everyone else hates him also. And so you have this bit where we again have the phone imagery, and it's just a long... I'm gonna play it double time because it's so long. This whole succession of people just admitting, yeah, I'm sorry but yeah, I hate your guts. You know what, man, I hate you. You're just terrible. And believing that that's what everyone thinks. That if everyone was given a chance, that is what they would say. But just after that, he will also talk about how piloting the Eva makes everyone praise him. He says, I know that they hate me because I hate myself. Which again, you can't get outside your own experience, right? So he is projecting how he feels about the world and how he is treating his experience as the only way things can be. His truth, the thing they warned him about at the end of last episode, that his truth is not actually universal, that he can't see beyond that. And that's why I think considering other people's pain causes more dissonance for him. Because if it's not true, right, if he's been wrong all this time, that people don't feel there's a lot of sunk cost in that, right? So a lot of his time and sense of self has proceeded on the assumption that the way he feels about himself is reflected in the way that other people feel about him. So that's another reason I think it's kind of interesting that he is having a debate with all of the versions of other people that live in his heart, right? And the fact that they don't behave exactly the way he wants. Like they will sometimes, they'll all line up to tell him how much they hate him, how much they hate his guts. But then they will also praise him, right? But there is this contrast between this whole shouting at him for hating his guts, and then realizing that they also praise him. That when I pilot the Ava, they praise him. That is that makes him happy, right? But he's not happy because he also simultaneously imagines that they hate him, and that hatred makes him unhappy, and he somehow believes both simultaneously. Okay, that is cognitive dissonance, holding two conflicting opinions or perspectives in your mind at the same time, and you would do all kinds of things as a self-defense mechanism to justify that. So you get this scene where all of these different scenes of people looking at him, mostly is what it is, will play over him. So instead of him having any kind of distinct coloring in, the people that he encounters will color him in instead in the various experiences. So I should play that spell. So which one is how you really feel? And he doesn't know. They both are how he feel. That's where the dissonance comes from. And so piloting the Ava essentially clears up that dissonance for him. That becomes the identity that he doesn't have to worry about, because no one hates him as an Ava pilot, right? And people praise him as an Ava pilot. So by making his identity, trying to constrain it to just the thing that gives him positive feedback, it keeps him from being whole, right? Yeah, again, the red background, right? But, and this is I'd forgotten about this. It's a great thing they do. As he goes down the line of justifying the pilot, and people arguing he's worried that what he will do will disappear. They'll talk about how he never had anything else. That's fine. That's fine if all of my identity is tied up in being the Ava pilot, because I never had anything else before that. And he'll even bring up all the cello practice, which seemed like just a throwaway at the time. And it's the thing he put a lot of effort into, and it never became something that gave him a sense of value. It never became. It was all sound and fury, signifying nothing, right? It was, and he was good at it. Good enough that Asuka praised him in spite of herself. But it's also not something he chose to do for himself. But anyway, the part I actually want to get to is he seems to be okay with defining himself as the Ava pilot, and all these scenes are playing over him as though that all these things are coloring what he is. But now Asuka actually comes in to point out that it shifts off of him. You see, it's her voice that comes in, that before long, you won't be able to do anything else without it, just like me. And so Asuka now provides the example that even trying to build your identity around that single thing, that I am an Ava pilot, and that gives me worth and value, she becomes the counterexample, because she was the same way, and when she lost it, she had nothing else, right? She lost what was making her think. So he's reaching for ways to answer this question, and the version of Asuka that lives in him now provides an example of why even that has pitfalls. Even that won't be an answer for all time. Yeah, his answer is still coming from the outside. So let me find, we're going to skip ahead slightly here. There's this bit in the middle. Totally forgot about this. where we have a series of scenes that immediately should make us think of when we were in Ray's mind, and she was observing different aspects of nature and the mountains and the sky and all this. And this time, all of them, and this is different characters are saying this, but each of them finds a way to internalize these, neutral scenes of humanity, of nature, of just existence, and turning them to things they don't like, turning them to things that are negative. And some very, wanting to let go of existence thoughts in there, too, right? But each of their reactions turn negative, which I totally forgotten that happened. Let's find the other part I want to talk about. Eventually, the question is put to him by the three girls, something we talked about before. What do you wish for? What do you want? All that. This time, it's put to the question's put to him. The same question he was putting to Misato and Asuka in his mind. And the answer to that, I'll have to skip for it because hold on, I'm sorry. I obviously didn't have this marked right. Yeah, okay, because it plays twice. That's why I got confused. Sorry. So what he wants, trying to answer that question. They want contact and acceptance, and it will go back to that image of him at the breast, right? Is it okay for me to stay next to you? Is it okay for me to be here? Do you love me? Which was the other title of our last episode. So going back to trying to have that parental acceptance, that baseline being accepted as their parents, and it'll be both of them. It'll be both Asuka and Shinji in here, wanting to know if they are loved by their parents. Do you love your mother? And you'll see each of them with their issues. Asuka with her mother, and Shinji with his father will reject this, and they're doing it out of a place of anxiety, out of fear, afraid of being hated, afraid they may cease to exist. So we come back to that. What do you want? What are you looking for? And here is the thing. Don't you want happiness? Before I can be happy, I have to want something. Which, Shinji's become very self-aware, hasn't he? That he actually, the thing that's getting in the way of his happiness is that he doesn't know what he wants. That's why he keeps asking, what do you wish for to Asuka? What are you asking for to Misato? He doesn't know what he wants. He doesn't have a thing to pursue to make him happy. From the beginning, he had no chance of happiness because he has no goal that he's chasing himself. It's only reactive. It's only I want to not feel this. I want to not be abandoned. There's nothing he actually pursues, and by default, he can't be happy. And so in this, I said this beginning of the answer, what he finally decides that what he wants is to be valuable. I'll back it up. He does the thing where he's, his hand is, he wants to grasp his hand, but he doesn't. And when he actually makes a fist is when he's usually made a decision. I haven't pointed out. That's been a pattern several times. He makes the decision that he wants to be valuable. And this time, he is saying that he wants to be valuable, so he won't be abandoned. Okay, so he immediately goes back to that fear of abandonment. But what will happen is that he wants value as a base thing, and the person who comes in to answer that finally is his actual mother. That's something you can only give yourself. Sorry. His own worth. And so you get to the kind of the base thing. What is he? They've been getting their, both he and Asuka, and it shows both of them, have been getting their value, their sense of worth from potting the Ava. But in this moment, they don't have that anymore. So without that, what are they worth? Or at a more basic level, what am I? All right, who am I? What am I? That prompts the art shift, eventually. It prompts the art shift as soon as I've scrolled to the right point. All right, here we go. Now, suddenly, animation as medium pays dividends, because this would be a very weird thing to try to pull off in live action, right? Be a totally different effect. So when trying to figure out what he is, it appears to be an answer to that question, what am I? And it shifts through a whole different, several different ways of representing Shinji, right? And he realizes it. These are all just things that represent me. These are all things that let other people recognize me as me. These are things which signify Shinji. That's all they are. They're not as sum total. The silhouette and the outline, all that, that's who is he? If these are just, if any of these can, if any of those can stand for him, his name, the different way he's drawn, the whatever, just several in there, it means that they're not him by default, right? Or by themselves, I'm sorry. That the face that he shows to other people, that's not the totality of who he is. By essentially seeing, this is the first time that he sees different versions of things that could be or mean Shinji, right? So he's trying to, we're not going to go through all of this, but illustrated versions of Rei and Asuka will get, and Misato will all get involved too. But Rei will add, there is a boundary between you and the scope of what it means to be you. But that is not, like I said, it's not the totality of who he is. That all these things which make up him, all these little details, are all elements of who he is. That they are all the facts that they talked about before. The truth is, the thing that he perceives himself to be me is the answer, that he's the me. That's not all those things which he can show to others, all those things which signify Shinji in the minds of other people are not the totality, that the scope of him is much bigger than that. That the thing that he considers himself, me, is the actual answer to that. And one of the things that will happen here, hold on. He'll go through his normal anxiety and self-doubt. We don't have to run through all that. Other than we'll have the part about how the only person who can console and understand him is you. That he cannot, no one else has that sense of everything that makes up him, or makes him up. And he can't define himself from the outside. And so this is where, well, I'm sorry, there's one more addendum to that. All these, sorry. I put a marker, I put a marker in the wrong place. The girls will point out that he is anxious. Now he's back in his collapsed, head on, hands on ears, pulled into himself state again, right? And they talk about you're anxious. This is the things that cause you anxiety. Who you are now, people around you, the environment you're in. And what is pointed out to them is that they're temporary. These things are transient. That who you are right now is not who you have to be forever. And to illustrate this, the world can be anything. And now suddenly he is in a world with no one in it, a world with complete freedom. Okay? There's nothing to restrain him. But that means it's empty. That means that it's empty unless he can populate it with things, unless he can come up with things that can exist in it. That the answer to what this world is has to come out of himself, but it makes him anxious. He has no... he's disoriented. Having no frame of reference, having the burden of having perfect freedom, and then therefore having to generate everything from within himself. The complete freedom and the complete lack of constraints means that the world is empty. And so who he'll be arguing with here is the world is empty unless he thinks of something, right? And he still doesn't know what to do. He can't think of himself. He can't visualize himself. He can't get a sense of who he is or what he wants to do. In a world where he can do anything, all it does is make him anxious. It's too many options. And so what will be, to illustrate this point, is they'll give him a constraint. They'll give him a down, right? All the endless possibilities cause him to do nothing. And the unease lessens. Suddenly he's actually able to walk around here. In exchange for giving up that little bit of freedom, he now feels safer. He has something to ground himself, orient himself from, right? Suddenly he can actually take action. And so it'll show that his perspective is different. That he can, without changing reality, he can change his perspective. The camera will kind of move around, right? But what happens, I can jump to it. Without that limitation, without the thing that came from outside of himself, with the empty space, he will begin to lose a sense of self. And here's where it talks about that you learn your shape by observing the shape of others. Right? Between, let's see, where it says, realizing the wall between self and other. Right? And basically you can't tell who you are without other people. And I won't skip past this, and because this is the thing I wanted to build up to here, because it goes back to like the silhouettes, creating the edge of who you are and who you are not. This is actually a thing that stuck with me from the series from the very first time, was this idea that observing others and figuring out who you are relies in some part upon other people, because seeing other people helps you figure out what you are not, right? By seeing the limits of what you are, seeing where you end and the rest of the world begins, you get a better sense of where you end. You get a better sense of the shape of you, as it says. And so, given the infinite freedom to define himself any way he wanted, he could not... he was paralyzed. He couldn't come up with he couldn't even form a good shape of himself, right? He couldn't do anything with the world, because he had no frame of reference, and no sense of self because of it. Which means other people become necessary to figure out where your silhouette ends, right? And figuring out where it ends tells you that these are all the things inside comprise me. It's not just the face that everyone else recognizes as me, the ways they signify Shinji. I myself figure out what I look like, where the edge of me is. Is how I figure out who I am. How much of the universe is internal versus external. You need the external universe to figure that out. As he says, he can't get the sense of his shape. He loses a sense of himself in that the world with nothing else in it, with no one else in it. And so other people are essential to this process, to figuring out who you are. And so interacting with them is tells you where your edges are, and you wouldn't know otherwise. But it's not the same as merging everybody together, right? That's the opposite of that. Then there is no difference between you and anyone else. There is no barrier between the things which comprise just you and the things which comprise something you didn't decide, something you didn't choose. The reality of the rest of the world exists regardless, but your sense of yourself depends on your own ability to gain that perspective, your own ability to see that. If that makes sense. I don't know. I just remember that so distinctly the first time I saw the series. The idea that other people are not necessarily a... And it goes to the point that the very first thing you realize is not you, is your mother. That your mother is the first. I'm not a doctor or anything, but like I have heard that infants take some time before they understand that they are a different thing from their mother. That they don't have that separation. They don't understand that they're a separate being. It actually takes us a while to figure that out. And so what Shinji is kind of realizing throughout this is the way that relates to the idea of different people who live in him, right? Different versions of the Misato and the Asuka and all that live in his heart, that those also make up him, that they are contained within the limits of who he is, the boundary between him and the outside. That's what he'll kind of realize. It's true that other people make up parts of my heart. And realizing that... Sorry, I've lost it really rapidly today. Realizing that he is not an island unto himself, that he defines the limits of what constitutes me, but realizing how essential it is to have those people in him, in addition to the way he finds inside him as well as outside him, prompts this... We're not going to go through it, but I mean, it's such a... We suddenly shift into a different genre. All the same characters, but suddenly we're in like your classic beginning rom-com, harem anime, first day of school, childhood friend wakes you up, indignant. She's the one that's close to him, but obviously he doesn't notice because she's a childhood friend, but the way she acts is obvious. Like, it's funny how much of, aside from Rei, it's funny how much of their personalities are exactly the same. And yeah, this is the jumping into this world, and I had to queue up Rei running in the bread in their mouth because we're gonna skip a bunch of this, but like, yeah, let's just go ahead and enjoy this bit of completely surreal moment compared to everything that's come before now. Anyway. Speaking of mood whiplash, right? What that helps Shinji realize, the takeaway, is that being able to see himself in any way different than the only way he's thought of himself, and he's been in fear of the other versions of himself that might live in other people. That while he doesn't like the version of himself he sees inside, he still hasn't considered the possibility of being anything else, right? And so that's what that otherwise what seems like a silly segment does for him, is that is a possibility that exists inside him. That who he is not the sum of his existence, because time continues to move. Even if he wasn't an Eva pilot, he wouldn't disappear. And so considering that he's not in a fixed position, that the miserable version of himself is not the only possible version, means that the current version of him could conceivably change into something else. That the truth of his truth, that going back to that idea of personal truth, and as everyone gathers around him to kind of weigh in, Kinsuke will be the one to say that it's a contrived truth, that you are essentially choosing that truth, and that while you do need other people to define you, other people can have a too strong an influence on how you see the world. That there's not a single truth. And the example they use here is, whoops, did I skip too far? No. The example they use is sunny days are cheerful and rainy days are depressing. And you start to make that association because it's what other people tell you. But that's not the truth. That's not the only way it can be, right? And so what Shinji's problem seems to be is accepting too much of outside influence and being afraid of what that being afraid of what that, I'm not phrasing this very well, am I? Letting that be a truth, him not being in control of his personal orientation of truth, the way he sees himself and sees the whole world around him. You need, let's see, hold on, because it actually says it directly, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so, and building off that, they'll talk about how just to change one small detail, the way that you interpret that, way you internalize that, can transform everything else. That truth within us is, that our version of truth is very fragile. But that also means it can easily be changed, right? So you need others to define yourself, to figure out who you are, but that is not the end of the conversation with your own heart, okay? They help you form your edges, but not what is contained within those edges. Versions of all of them live in you, but you get to choose how much of each of them make you up, right? And there'll be this thing where he talks about hating himself, and sorry, we're skip to the end so we can just talk in a more broad way. When he's considering that he hates himself, one of the things he will start to say is he'll admit that I'm a sneak and I'm a coward, that I am dishonest and a weakling. And these are all the things that he said back when Toji and Kensuke tried to see him off the train and showed that empathetic link to him. And that takes us way back in the series. But he's come a long way since then, right? He doesn't have to feel that way anymore. That maybe he has been defining himself from the outside. Maybe he has been letting the people who live in him have too much a say over the truth. The person he is today is not the person he has to be forever. That he can continue to change, and so realizes that the only person he can be is me, and he wants to be himself. And he answers the question from the very beginning of the 25th episode, why it's okay to be here, right? That it is okay for him to be here. And then, congratulations, Shinji. Congratulations. You figured it out. Which seems, took a minute. Oh, thank you. And finally, congratulations. Congratulations. Everyone here, even Hikari. Now it can be wholesome. Yes, I'm figuring out this very reason. Even Pen. And yes, I can understand why this would be an odd place to end if you were expecting to find out a lot more about things. But anyway, that was me attempting to walk through it in order, at least. Yep, and Maya. And yeah, congratulations. Congratulations. Reached the end of the 26th. So that was a very long way of trying to explain to someone where they can get their sense of value, right? But hopefully, I don't know, you've told me, hopefully walking through it a little bit more in the way it's kind of building an argument might make it a little more clear. Because it's essentially, at the end, is, oh, thank you. Oh my gosh. My whole chat filled with subs. Wow. That's a lot. Awesome. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. That's awesome. Look at that. Gosh, now I've totally lost my train of thought now. Look at all that. Nice. That's cool. Sorry, I'm still so new to this thing with Twitch, and yeah, congratulations also. So I agree that it is a little bit unusual to have apparently given an answer after all the times that it raises questions and refuses to give. Spam's still going. That then it actually gives an answer. It does weigh in on whether he should be himself, and I guess tries to explain all the reasons why this would be okay. Which, put like that, it sounds like well, thank you, Captain Obvious, defender of the already known. But yeah, and it ends on an upturn. Congratulations. You don't know what they're congratulating for necessarily, because are they still where are they in this last scene? This um, so yeah, Shinji thanks everybody, and Yui's there too. So I mean, I guess you have that moment where you think, I guess they're still inside the world of instrumentality. Yeah, so that's the question. What is the context for this? Are these all the versions of these people who live in him, or is this actually tearing apart whatever has been forced upon them, the forced sharing of hearts? And yeah, you're right. Shinji gets what he wants. He gets this recognition and this positive reinforcement that the thing he chose was good, was right. But yeah, relative to what we know, we, I think, should think that he is still in his mind, because it said that when he's in the little theater and looking around at the end of 25, it's talking about how this is the world you yourself chose. That you yourself. That was great timing, by the way, for all the gift subs. I'm guessing you planned that. That was kind of crazy. And so, for what we know at the moment, it looks like he simply destroyed that world with nothing in it, the theater that was being talked about. Yeah, and there's a thing at the end there, like thanks to father, to mother, and to all the children. So I can find it exactly for you. I'll show you. It's not even like it doesn't even actually end with the congratulations. It ends with him thanking them, to father, thank you, to mother, goodbye, and to all the children, congratulations. What are all the children in that? Yeah, is it using the title cards to speak directly to the audience? There's like the furigana or whatever that is, the writing out how to pronounce over the kanji there, which I think is usually something you do, something directed at kids. Yeah, could it be children of man? Like, what is even they're saying there? Yeah, is it the Lilin, the children of Lilith? Are we getting really like it's the Ravi Starlight giraffe? Yeah, speaking directly to the audience unexpectedly. Yeah, I mean, it is just saying children. Yeah. For the furigana is children. Okay, yeah. So it's the kanji is using. Kodama, children, and the furigana is just a, what do you even call that? English. I know it's rendered into katakana for being a foreign word, but is there a word for something that's intentionally trying to pronounce it as close to the English word as possible? Anyway, not to get too hung up on that. Yeah. I mean, as this... my emotional walls have been torn down. I feel that thanks. I feel that right here after all this. Thank you, non-specified title card. Yeah, so 25 and 26, in general. Never minding how they fit into the scope of things, but as by themselves. Took a lot of the show to set up where this kind of internal crisis would make sense, where we could kind of understand where, because there's really 4 characters we kind of dive into. I know it's mostly Shinji, but we also dive into Misato and Asuka. We also dive into Rei a little bit, and in each of their little experiences we get a little something we didn't quite know before, you know, like Misato's desire to feel dirty and all that, Rei's unease about the idea that there might be part of her that's not her, that's different from the someone she sees herself, and that may cause her to disappear. We get to see the conversation that Asuka overheard from her stepmom and confirmed now what was only hinted at before, that she's the one that found her mother. So we actually do get little bits from them, right? But it is mostly the Shinji show. But now I feel like we kind of understand for all four of them where the root cause of the problems they face throughout the whole series comes from, right? Because it's oversimplified to say that my mother died in my youth and that made me the way I am, or I didn't know my father and he abandoned me and that made me who I am. Having seen that all along, and more importantly, having seen the way each of them behaves, now here at the end, trying to trace the kernel of what causes all of their behavior. Kind of, you look backwards at some of the things they did and the way they chose to do things and their temperament even, with just another little bit of understanding. But by making these final two so abstract and metaphysical and philosophical and having more universal application rather than just the application to the characters, I think it's a really overt invitation to the audience to read themselves into this and to try to wonder if some of these answers work for them too, if these are maybe some of their problems as well, right? Yeah, and again, how you feel about these two as an original ending with nothing else after is kind of a different thing. It's a very interesting debate about what constitutes a whole story. But by themselves, just the way they ended. I mean, when I first saw this, I was like, not only was I not expecting that ending, but the way it doesn't try to simplify this debate, this internal struggle with how one builds a sense of self, what role other people have in how you figure out the shape of yourself. Even the exploratory, he's put in a world with nothing, total freedom, and how he doesn't handle that, basically. I don't know, I thought that I was really, it made an impression. Yes, it finishes the character arcs, and I think that's the problem with it. You want to see arcs that have been addressed throughout an entire series, brought to some kind of resolution, even if it's clear it's meant to be a unresolved resolution, for lack of a better way. And so this one definitely seems to complete the character journeys. Like, we at least kind of get some kind of answer. It's mostly for Shinji, but at least by diving into the three girls, we get some closure on that. But definitely we have a lot of thematic things that are left hanging, and to say nothing of narrative arcs. So it's not, I don't want to stand up here and say this is good or bad or objectively wrong, but in the sense of leaving those arcs unfinished, it is, I feel like, a incomplete way to end the show. And so I understand where the consternation comes from. But at this point, it's not something we have to dwell on, because I know a lot of you this is as far as you've gotten. You don't know what's coming next, but you do know something's coming next, which changes how you experience this. But right now, not knowing the rest of that, it's actually unfortunate the way it was first done, because the way people were worried about the things that didn't get answered changes how they would normally experience these episodes. And so knowing there's more definitely changes. You realize, well, I can appreciate or try to enjoy or try to understand this for what it is by itself, instead of worrying about how good or bad of an ending it is, right? And I think it's you just you almost realize, I mean, a storyteller will kind of tell you where they're going, what they intend for their story. They could by setting your expectations. It's something we've pointed out all along. The way they will introduce a term and we know it's going to come back later. The way they will do things to intentionally increase the empathy between the audience and characters by making us experience things at the same time as the character, or making us uncomfortable or grossed out or whatever at the same time as the characters. So that forms an expectation. And so what happened in 24 is you had a lot of things introduced that, to that point, the way the story had been told caused us to expect those things to be answered. We just learned things like the black and white moon and the about to be 12 Avas, and that's what Zila is working towards, and all that being brought up at that point, we realized, oh, we're going to find out more about this. No. No, we don't. So, and yes, there is like the external, like you're saying, there's the external story, the big stakes mixed in with the low stakes, right? And throughout the whole story, the two have interweaved, have been interwoven, whatever. They have been interwoven. And in this, it's like the Evangelions and the large-scale thing is essentially stripped away, other than we know that human instrumentality has happened somehow. All we get from this is that it somehow involved Rey. We stopped Kaoru, that was the last angel, so we don't understand why that suddenly triggers things, or why that allows it to happen. So there are a lot of things that should suggest to you that this was not how those narrative patterns were meant, and thematic patterns were meant to be wrapped up. So, yeah, and essentially the characters are the important thing. You're right. That's what we get invested in, you know? And so taking 2 episodes to just wrap up all the loose ends for narrative and lore and all that, and leaving all that aside, that wouldn't have been satisfying either, you know? Because it is the characters we're invested in. That's how you get into story. I mean, having some sort of empathetic connection. Empathy doesn't mean you have to like someone, by the way. It just means that you are making an effort to understand them, to close that distance between self and other, right? Yeah, and this was the original ending. This was all it was, and for a lot of people, that was fun. It was just, in a series that had so many mysteries, what's one more mystery piled on top of it? Because, again, by trying to conclude the characters, which are the thing we really care about, you kind of get at the thing that the actual high stakes, the actual thing the audience is invested in. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, I mean, when I watched it too, at the moment, I kind of knew sort of that there was more, but not like in the sense that when this is over, I was like, well, at least there's more. When I watched it myself the first time, this was the whole experience for me. And, I mean, like I said, it blew my mind at the time. It was so different than what I expected, but without being like someone threw a bunch of crap together to just call it an ending, which I think would have been just trying to wrap up all the narrative things and shove it into 2 episodes. I think that would have been the impression. So by taking the thing that they thought was more important and doing this really careful study of that, it was very surprising. It was extremely daring, you know. And in a way, it meant that it didn't have to, by having such a different ending, it somehow transcends having a disappointing ending or an ending that falls flat, just because it's hard to even judge this against the whole rest of the series, right? Yeah, so, and y'all are talking, see the real ending. We talk about end of Evangelion. Even that's probably not the right way to think of it. Like, so yeah, the real ending of End of Evangelion. It does come later, but I don't know. It becomes an interesting. You can't talk about it now because it'll be spoilerific, but like a good later part of a story, End of Evangelion will help shape how you understood what we just saw. That might be the best thing the best way to think of it without spelling it out. And so, yeah, because this is the thing that wraps up. And I can see in chat, people have different takes on this, right? That if it is the conclusion to the world is what you want to see, then this might feel like a disappointment. But if you really wanted this careful character analysis, then that might seem superfluous. Yeah. Am I going to go over the opening? It's kind of a thing. I kept thinking, what would be a good time to go over it? I guess maybe this afternoon would be a better thing, because at this point we're still past where I would have ended for sure. So yeah, we can get especially philosophical here. What is an ending? When it comes down to it, does anything really end? Yeah, we're a little over. I don't want to change when we start the later one either, because it's already very late for some people. And to say again, we're just going over the recap later. I think the amount of new material is going to be extremely minuscule, and I think especially if you were watching the Netflix versions of these last few episodes, then there will be especially little new things to talk about. So, so the death rebirth, yeah. So my understanding is this just death, and I watched enough of it to see that that's actually how the credit crawl will say, because rebirth essentially begins into End of Evangelion. Yeah, but like you were saying, you can understand why some people did not take this well when it happened originally. Yeah, so Rebirth is now, I think, part of End of Evangelion, the way it is organized on Netflix. So, yeah, well, it is confusing. You should be confused because nothing about the way they tried to extend the story, if you want to think of it that way, made sense. Yeah. In as far as how you would normally do that, I guess would be a better way to put it. Yeah, okay, so let's be more specific. The original, so we have these director's cut, I guess, 21 through 24 especially, I think, have all the extended stuff. I think this is like Death with those things added back in. I think that's my take. I'm gonna sit down and watch it here since I fell asleep during it before to make sure I'm not telling you wrong. But I think in general, especially if you watch the 26 on Netflix, I don't think there's much if any new stuff in Death True Squared. So yeah, it's not even like a full hour if you cut through the credits. But it tells the story in a different order, which might be, that's why we're going to cover it just a little bit. No, we're actually not covering it. Okay, just FYI, I'm not worried about the text of it, other than if I find something that I do think is different or is worth pointing out. Mostly, this might be a way to any other questions anyone has about the 1 through 26, trying to get that cleared up before End of Evangelion. Because I fell asleep. Yeah, because I passed out. Better way to put it. Yeah. So, like I said at the onset, if you weren't here at the very beginning, this is not how I will be doing series in the future. I am amazed and sorry also for the people who have been here for so much of it, especially the people who are also having to watch the episodes apart from this. I know this has been a tremendous investment of time, but there's no other way to do it. And I just have this 1 week to try to do it all. So, but we won't in the future. We won't do this kind of breakneck pace, like for my sake also, but also because, yeah. I mean, this has become, if you try to catch everything, this has been almost all you've been able to do each day, and I'm sorry for that. Partially that's just Evangelion, the nature of Evangelion, and partially that is just my own propensity to elaborate. So yeah, that was fun. Let's never do it again. But I hope that, well, yeah, it's an entire series, very dense series. We have the movies to deal with also, but this is to kick off this whole live streaming thing. This made the most sense for me. The timing's perfect. There's so many people who have never gotten to experience this, and I'm going to pay for it when I go back to work, but I could swing this, so I want to do it. And the entire Ghost in the Shell universe. I brought this up before someone was seeing, but that was the original thing I tried to do on my channel over there. That was the first thing I was going to do, was the entire Ghost of the Shell canon. But that I learned very quickly how much time goes into making each of those videos over there on YouTube. And so that got, yeah, killed. But one day, yeah, don't listen to these people telling you to take care of yourself. Push on. We'll do the whole thing in one go. We'll do it live. Yeah, I couldn't keep it up after work. Yeah. Yeah, I have newfound appreciation for the people who actually produce anime, because I'm pretty sure like this is just their normal day-to-day, right? Stream conversation after a whole series of analysis. Yeah. So I have to sit down next week when this is behind me, and always with the high school DxD. You know, at the rate at which we can cover stuff. Yeah, sorry. This is the only timing that was ever going to work. But yeah, in the future, I like the conversation that sprung up. Like, that's the thing I wanted the most out of this. And in that respect, like, if that was all that happened, my expectations are met and defied and blown up, and I'm awesome. And now we've got all this other stuff happening too. That's just, I'm not even like here. I'm not present well enough to even appreciate it all. But yeah. So one of the things I did talk about was using Twitch as a way to do like an after discussion of some of the main channel work, right? But it will also be a way going forward to do much faster, have much faster conversations about stuff that's ongoing, because I have prioritized ongoing shows from the beginning, and so every 3 months there's going to be a new collection of shows going on. And I know a lot of people, since I only cover the current shows essentially on my channel, I know a lot of the people that came from there are also people who watch seasonal anime, right? And so and so definitely one of the things that will happen, yeah, and it's one of those things that is easier for dealing with spoilers, is when we talk about, it's fully my intent just to talk about seasonal anime going forward on this platform. Like what exactly that is, what shape it takes, what the timing and structure is. Got to figure that out. That is absolutely the intent. That's absolutely the reason I wanted to make this event, this unusual way of kicking things off, to be the thing that set it up. We'll end the moment the new season begins. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to be streaming new stuff next week, just because I need a minute. But what I do intend is to make picking some shows that are ongoing and do them like this. Couple-hour stream, 2 shows, depending the time, like at a time. I don't know how many, I don't know what days, but yeah, that is absolutely the intent with having done this and having got it established, set all this crap up, and I'm still not done figuring that out because the audio is now driving me crazy. But this was to set us up to do that, for me to do that in addition to, as long as Land of Lustrous. I mean, it's been this long. What's the rush now? I'm kidding. Don't hate me. I want it to be done too. For my own sake. I love it. I love talking about it. So, I don't want to announce it here, but I have a pretty good idea what's going to have a pretty good idea of what the next season will look like for sure. And yeah, by all means go, especially people who want to watch that. I'm going to do the same thing. But again, the later one tonight starts an hour later than the second broadcast have normally started, but we are really just, it's a retrospective. So especially if you watch the Netflix versions, there may be nothing for you there. So it's probably going to be a short stream. Actually, it's going to be a short stream because I've got to get prepared for End of Evangelion. Will Twitch platform be taking the time away from that? So what's going to happen is it's a easy thing to add on to it, but a lot of it depends on the alter egos situation from thing. Yeah, so people can't make it tonight or otherwise or whatever. This would be the time to watch End of Evangelion. If you've been here for a lot of this and you need a break, tonight's a good one to skip. I might turn the stream on and there's no one here, and then I'll turn things off, right? But that's going to be short no matter what. That's really just here's your last chance to try to figure out what's going on before End of Evangelion. And then I gotta turn it off so I can get ready myself. So yeah, and tonight, I mean, it'll be really tempting for me to do the normal just chat, right? Like, I obviously default to that, but I can't tonight. Not only because I do feel much better now, but not only because I can't do that to myself any further, but it's more important to get ready for End of Evangelion, because a couple things happen. So, well, good. I'm glad it's been enjoyable. I mean, y'all don't understand how much this is what I somehow wanted to get to, and it sucks that the live aspect of it will excludes people in the way that the static stuff does not, which is why I'm kind of upset about how the audio is turning out, because depending on what you listen to, which I can't even figure that out. I need an audio engineer to weigh in. The YouTube videos are fine, if a little bit tinny sounding, depending what you listen to them on, or they are completely inaudible, or it's way too much bass and rumbles your speakers off. So I have no idea what could cause all three of those things in the same stream. So yeah, I know people can't get the same streams. That's going to be a problem down the line that there's always going to be. Like, for the next season at least, the streams will probably be in this same time slot, which is great for you people who are here now. But I know I cut out a lot of people by not doing it during North America prime time, right? That's actually when I think that's when Twitch is busiest even. So eventually I want to do not a single slot to mix it up, because the conversation will be different each time, right? Yeah, there's always going to be someone who can't make it. I can't accommodate everyone. That's why I had everybody vote, right? And I'm pretty sure the large number of, for whatever reason, the large number of you who live in Europe, or at least in those time zones, won the day, I think, essentially, which is why it's in these slots. So yeah, I gotta do some more detailed analysis of the audio to figure it out, because I don't know where it's being lost. So like one of the things I'm doing, my mixer here is putting a second output to the field recorder, which is how I'd normally record things. And that is a totally different audio than what's being recorded here on OBS and then being pushed to you. And I don't know what piece in that chain is causing the problem. But I can't solve it without pulling it apart, and that might mean I can't do the stream tomorrow, so we're going to fix it later. It sucks. I'll lose the value or the quality out of several of these, but yeah, I don't know enough. Audio is something I've had to learn as I've gone along, and still don't get it all. So, all right, I'm going to call this so I can go watch stuff and get ready. If you cannot make it tonight, again, it's probably not the end of the world, but if you were looking for a little bit of clarity, or you just want to chat for a second, fine, but it's going to be short. So yeah, I've slowly pushed the volume up because people were talking about it. Until the next stream. How long? Hour and 20 minutes, is that right? End of Evangelion will be tomorrow. We'll have the whole stream to talk about it. I think that is what I said. Yeah, so an hour and 20 minutes or so to the next one. Yeah, again, if you want the time off, don't come tonight. Just bag it, man, because like it's going to be short. It has to be short. It's really just something I said I would do. I want to be there because I said I would be there, and help anyone that's confused about the series to this point not be confused going into End of Evangelion, because that's pretty important. So yeah, tomorrow's the home stretch. You're right. And that's why it has to be short tonight. I gotta get ready for End of Evangelion. So, alright. I'm gonna call it. It's gonna be short. No, it is gonna be short. It's too important. End of Eva is too important. So again, if a bunch of you just don't show up and don't have any questions to distract me, that works in my favor too, perhaps. So, alright guys. I'll end the stream. One day I'll actually add the end stream button to the console here. But it is not this day. Alright, I'll see you later or tomorrow. See you guys. And thanks for all the subs, all the gifting. That was amazing. That was a great timing too, and I realized you planned that, but that was perfect. So, bye.